It's a spring morning. It's a Friday morning, and it's a morning to meet Pat McCart. How is life
How
in
are we, Jude?
Donegal, Pat? Huh?
Brand, Jude, I know we've been saying it, but we're saying it with great joy. There's definitely spring in the air. There's no doubt about it. There's even a different air. There's different climate almost. It's no longer that bitter cold.
Yeah, yeah. And the daffodils are coming up in our flower bed in the corner of the
Yeah, our
garden,
daffodils are coming up as
despite my
well.
efforts to
Yeah,
destroy them. Anyway, let's go to the events of the day. There's an article in the Irish Examiner by a man we both know, Jim Sharkey, who was the Irish ambassador to. Was he the Irish ambassador to Russia? I knew he worked in Russia with the
yeah, he was for a time. Yeah, he was the first Irish diplomat to go to Russia. He was like John the Baptist for the guy that came after him, whose name escapes me totally. But then he went.
Yeah,
Jim opened. He opened the embassy. He was some sort of evangelist. But
yeah.
anyway, secondly, then he came back years later as ambassador himself.
He's been ambassador to different places, Australia and
Yeah,
Switzerland and so on.
Denmark, Japan, yeah, and
Yeah.
various places.
Right. The interesting thing about him is that he has written this article in today's Irish Examiner, and I'd urge anybody who's interested in the whole thing about Ukraine to read it. Now, there are a couple of things jumped out at me, but I'll let you go first, Pat. Stop talking.
Yeah,
Pay attention.
the thing I really liked about Jim's article, it's extremely well written, but it's also very easy to understand. It's a complex conflict, Jude, but Jim explains it very well. And you know that in the West we tend to demonize the Russians. When you read Jim's article, he's not justifying Putin, but he's explaining Putin, and it makes a lot of sense. Putin, when he's about 2014, with the elections in Ukraine, he saw interference from the West, and a pro-Russian guy who was elected was sort of hounded out. And then he saw that there was a chance that they could lose Sevastopol, which is, by the way, the only warm water port that the Russian Navy has. So for them, there was a bit of an existential threat. But for the West and for the people of Ukraine, they were saying, we're entitled to our independence, we're entitled to self-determination, and the Russians shouldn't be coming in here and determining what our future. So both sides have legitimate claims. Now, Thomas would come up with what I consider quite a controversial thing. He's suggesting for any peace plan, maybe the West and NATO and the Americans and anybody else you can care to name might have to get used to the fact that the Russia will hold on to Crimea, because for their strategic interests, it's vital, even though they've taken it over illegally.
I thought his article was very illuminating. For example, that you mentioned it, that 2014 event. Now, there was a revolt then, and the reason there was a revolt, there were unrealistic expectations of NATO and the EU membership, part of that.
Yeah.
And what he describes as the Russian-leaning, democratically elected president was unceremoniously outed, and ultra-nationalist right-wing agitators, as he says, set alight the flammable tinder of eastern Ukraine. So, in fact, he's confirming that in 2014, the legally elected government was shut out. Now, that may be an awkward fact, but it is in fact to put in.
I think it's called, Viktor Yanov.
Yeah, Viktor Yanukovych, yeah.
There was disputes about whether he was really elected, because remember the Russians poisoned his opponent as well. So there's a wee bit of dispute about the legitimacy. But I think Jim's point was there was an election. This guy, whether he was elected totally legitimately, but he still was elected. And the Russians are saying he was elected legitimately and then was driven out by the pro-West because there was this, the Ukrainians wanted to join the EU and to join NATO. That the Russian side of the argument wasn't given fair play.
Yeah, I think that the things he mentions, it's not that there's any ambiguity about where he stands in terms of the Ukraine. He says, it's entitled to be an independent, free from strife country, and the Russians were wrong to invade it. But he sets it in a context, and I really like that. That first of
I
all,
really
there
like the
was a
context.
background of right-wing people who ousted the democratically elected government in 2014. The fact that Russia was worried, as you say, about Sevastopol, which is the only major naval base that they
What they
have in the
have.
Black
Yeah,
Sea.
yeah,
And the third thing
yeah,
he suggests, now he starts it and ends it with "Give peace a chance," Reverend, that famous John Lennon
yeah,
song. He suggests that the Crimea, which is a difficulty, that
yeah.
should be, it only, he says, first of all, that only recently has come to be a Ukrainian possession. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't know that, by the way. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it sort of changes the complexion of it being an integral part. Maybe there's an argument for it, but it has only recently been acquired by, relatively recently, by
Yeah,
Ukraine. And the other thing
uh,
he suggests is that a way of resolving that might be to have an internationally supervised referendum for the Crimea, where the people of the Crimea
exactly.
say, we want to be part of Russia or we want to be part of the Ukraine. That would seem to be
Yeah,
eminently sensible. What do you think?
yeah. Well, I know for a fact. I remember chatting to Jim. Jim actually, as far as I remember, Jude, he did a degree in Russian at
That's right.
Newcastle
That's right. That's
University,
right.
and he speaks Russian.
Yeah.
So unlike a lot of the keyboard warriors and conspiracy theorists who come on social media, Jim actually knows what he's talking about, and is given a very fair. There's, I don't say, I would contend whether you're on the side of the Russians or the side of the West, to simplify it. Jim's article still holds up because it explains both sides.
I think that's very important. I really do. You'll get any number of articles which will tell you about the terrible things that the Russians have done in the Ukraine. And they're right too, I'm sure, in most cases. But you get very few articles actually which will give you this aspect of it, these mitigating factors, so to speak. The fact that the 2014 Ukrainian government was pushed out illegally, the fact that Russia was worried about getting access to its naval base in the Black Sea, and best of all, I think he started to do what a number of people are starting to do now, saying, how are we going to get peace in Ukraine?
Yeah,
How can we
I'm
work
glad you brought
towards
that up,
peace?
because that's
See,
exactly
the trouble is,
that's exactly where I was going with it.
yeah, because there's a tendency to say, well, we can't have peace until we push out the last Russian. You know, it's a wee bit more complicated than that, maybe.
Yeah,
Anyway,
and just the fact that
yeah, go ahead,
the
Pat.
Chinese mentioned the fact that they want a peace process, which was sort of dismissed, what we know, almost as risible by the West. I'm not
Yeah,
so sure. The Chinese, no, they're saying there has to be an end game here, and I think that strikes me as sensible.
exactly. I mean, what a sort of twisted line of thinking have we got where we say, let's send more warplanes, let's send more
Yeah,
ammunition, let's send more firmer NATO support. Like, let's
yeah,
kill more people. And then China
yeah,
says, look, do you think we should sit down and try to work out a peace pattern, peace process of some kind? And everybody just
yeah,
dismisses it. That's crazy. That's crazy. I
yeah,
think Jim Sharkey has done a service to the nation by writing that article. He's raised points that other
yeah,
people I haven't seen raising. And
yeah,
he does it in a very measured way while still maintaining that the Ukraine should never have been invaded. Okay,
yeah,
let's go to my hometown, Omagh,
yeah,
which is the commentators all say has suffered an awful lot. Uh,
yeah,
and the death, no, I was going to say the death, but the lethal attack on that man, John Caldwell, who was a chief inspector, chief inspector, I think. What's
yeah.
your immediate reaction? And then do you have any change reaction, or would you see it in a wider context, or what, Pat?
Jude, the first thing I'm going to put on the record, I wish these dissidents would go and crawl under a stone somewhere. Jude, they're contributing nothing. In fact, I think they're putting back peace on Ireland and possibly even Irish unification a long, long way. Right, I had listened years ago, and by the way, let me get this clear. I'm not justifying anything. I'm just making a point here. I listened. Martin McGuinness told me years ago, and I read numerous Republicans saying the reason they went down a certain path was they had 50 years of unionist misrule, 50 years of bigotry, sectarianism, and all the other things about it. and then when the civil rights took to the streets, they were batting off the streets. That there was no vehicle for nationals who are opposed to a sectarian state could get a remedy. Along comes they got involved in conflict, and eventually, after years of negotiation, we got a peace process. Martin McGuinness says after that there was no need for violence. There was a way out. We could negotiate and all the rest of it. Now, okay. And I read your article, by the way, which was an excellent article, where you said, if you listen to the people who are now saying we were told when there was a better way we could negotiate on and we could find a remedy by talking, and now there's no Stormont. Brexit has been imposed, international treaties are being ignored, and basically the DUP are swinging the rights of nationalists all over the place. But that does not justify what there are remedies, Jude, and they're coming down the track. I wonder, even if we discuss it later on, could the EU and the UK agree something on the protocol on Brexit that will overrule the DUP? There are ways out of things now that there weren't before. So I seriously believe these people are doing us all a disservice.
I must say I agree with you completely. They are putting back Irish interests when they acted as they did. Apart from the fact they tried to kill a man. It's a disservice to Ireland what they did. Now, what I tried to say in my blog though was, what happened? Why would they choose this, and how would they see it? Well, you see, the two things we see, as you said, is a peaceful path through negotiation and discussion and so on towards United Ireland, or a warlike path, a violent path, which will maybe bring us what we want. Clearly, we've opted for the peaceful path, but these guys would say, some people dismissed this and said, these guys don't think at all. Everybody thinks to some extent. They mightn't think clever, but everybody does some thinking. And I think anybody who picks up a gun, now you might despise them morally, but in terms of political violence, which is what this is, they usually have some kind of thinking. And their thinking is the whole possibility of United Ireland is for the birds, because Stormonts were being screwed. All the international treaties have been broken. The DUP is saying, no, you will not move us 1 inch, and Ulster will always be British. So you can see how that could emerge in the warped actions in Omagh a few days ago. Would you agree?
Yeah. And you can see it. They're basically saying now, there's that thing of Jim Allister swirling around there, the private meeting where he said that no self-respecting unionist, no matter what the results, could serve under Sinn Féin at Stormont. Now, you asked the point, how do these people who believe in all this think? That's how they're thinking. This is a waste of time. Now, but here, the point is, they tried to kill a man, and I totally abhor that. I don't think it's, and I wish him and his speedy recovery. I want to put that on the record. Sometimes when you try to explain things, it's almost as if you're justifying. I am not justifying. Exactly. I'm simply explaining. And the thing about it, Jude, is I think if we get on to this whole thing about the protocol, I saw there does seem to be a sort of a bit of a mood swing in Britain. The Times on, I think, Tuesday or possibly Wednesday said it's time for Rishi to develop a pair, if you'll pardon that expression, and say to the DUP and others, the ERG, that this is in the national interest, that a deal between the UK and the EU is signed. There's difficulty with trade, there's difficulty with the economy, and it's in the national interest that they get a deal that the UK and the EU can live with. And I think Times, now whether Rishi actually goes for it or not, it's a different matter.
Well, I'm not sure who it was. It might even have been Stephen Collins, of all people. But there was somebody in the Irish Times who did an article where they talked about how the DUP had put their faith in Johnson, and he, of course, had screwed them by saying, "Oh no, never have a border in the Irish Sea," and then he did exactly that thing. But there, at the moment, this article says Donaldson is sort of thrown in his lot with the ERG, European Research Group, the hardline Tories, who really don't want any border in there. You see, don't want any interference from Europe in terms of Northern Ireland. So I think they say that the DUP should get rid of that alliance, and they should be going behind Rishi Sunak and supporting him. And between them, we could have this deal whereby there would be an implementation of the protocol, but it would be one that wouldn't agitate or upset or whatever all sorts of unionists, including unionists who would vote for the DUP. Do you think that's pie in the sky to be wishing for that, or could that be a possibility?
Jude, no. Yeah, like let me revert again to that Jim Allister one. You made reference to it, I think, the last day as well. I hadn't seen it but somebody sent it to me. You know, he seems to be sitting in some sort of private club, and he's getting, he said, we're sort of basically holding Sir Geoffrey's feet to the fire, and it's as either power or principle, and for us it's principle, and our principle is never, no way are we going to share power with Sinn Féin. So Jude, if that is the reality. And by the way, you keep. I know in the past you said to me, Pat, you keep referring to Jim Allister, and he's only one. Jim Allister seems to be setting the agenda himself, and Jimmy Bryson, who, by the way, was on again on Stephen Nolan's show again. Now, a man who, what was the 167 votes? Why is he on every program? And he's pontificating as if he's speaking with absolute certainty about policy and about legalities.
Do you not find him an impressive? Do you not leave aside what he says, Pat? But do you not find him an impressive little speaker?
No, not in the least, Jude. Half the time, I get this impression that it's sort of erudition gone wrong. You know, from that he's using.
That's a good line. Erudition gone wrong. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of bullshit in what he's saying. And by the way, Jude, the LCC and various other people that last week came out and they were sort of threat. Jude, what do you call her? Susan McKay said loyalism is not capable of launching a major campaign. They're infiltrated right, left and centre, and the days of getting British security services to help them are long gone. So where do people like LCC and Jimmy Bryson and so on sort of saying loyalism will make it hot and heavy? That to me is all sort of saber rattling.
I hope you're right. I sincerely hope you're right. And you would think, all right, that having had the last 25 years to do it, that the Secret Service or MI5 or whatever would have infiltrated loyalism. But somebody brought it up in a report from OMA that dissident Republicans would have been infiltrated by the authorities and by MI5 or MI6, but they didn't. Well, one of two things: if they infiltrated them, then they went along with the attempt to kill John Caldwell. So they went along with that, yes. Or else they didn't infiltrate them to the point where they could stop that kind of thing.
Hold on, Jude. There's always going to be a bushfire somewhere. Like, was the last fatal attack was in 2017? Now this is 2023. And the other thing about it, there's always going to be a couple. But does anyone seriously think that the dissident IRA has any support that they could carry out a sustained campaign? Like, there's always going to be some sort of lone wolf attacks and so on. And by the way, let me get this clear. And I'm not saying they're innocent or guilty. But within 4 or 5 hours, 3 arrests, and I think there's another arrest this morning. And by the way, I'm not applying guilt. I'm just suggesting that maybe there could be more infiltration than you think.
Well, it would depend indeed on who they've arrested. Of course, it gets tricky then, because you see the PSNI would be under considerable pressure to get somebody, or show signs of action, and I'd be afraid, I'd be fearful just that they might pull in the usual suspects in order to appear to be on top of this.
I accept that, and that's and we don't know what evidence or even anything about those arrested. Yeah. But I'm saying, I remember reading quite a lot over the years, and I'm sure you did too, that nearly before when any loyalist was going for a pint, the intelligence service knew where they were and what time they'd be back at and what they had ordered when they got to the pub. So you start saying, yeah, but now whether they've got the same level of intelligence these days is a different matter, of course, but still.
All right, they couldn't use it. We just leave this topic now, but a final thought: they couldn't use this intelligence to retrospectively solve some problems that occurred, like who killed Pat Finucane, who killed Rosemary Nelson. All those killings which involved collusion.
And I know that they knew who did those things within 10 minutes after they happened. Of course they knew, and they like, you talk to anybody, they can give you. I knew certain people who could tell me just about who carried out this and who carried out that. Rosemary Nelson and Pat Finucane, I would say they within about 10 minutes after they happened. The handlers of most of those guys, the informants and the loyalists know exactly who done it,
and yet nothing has happened. Well, nothing has been done. You see, that's where you come back to the Omagh incident. Yeah. If you see that and you see nothing has been done, it justifies you in your own mind, these guys, to say, well, we'll take out this guy. There also might, of course, be a personal element in it. The fact that the chief superintendent detective was a man who was involved in investigations of who killed Ronan, a young guy years ago, a young PSNI guy. So I was wondering, to what extent was that a grudge thing, or was it something wider than that? Maybe it's a combination of the two.
Yeah, well, sure, what he called him, your man Travers, who was in the Miami showman. He had a go the other day, I saw it on social media, about Drew Harris. He said, I find it hard those people who describe Drew Harris as a decent man, when he says he was the guy who called for a public immunity certificate in regard to events and about the Miami killings when he was the assistant chief constable of the RUC. So, Jude, there was a really dirty war, and there was a lot of people getting protected. There was a lot of people informing. Things went ahead, and so on, and yet there was prior knowledge, or at least you have to work on the assumption that there was prior knowledge.
I suppose if we come back to the Omagh thing, it's the guys who shot that man, that they chose to see some of the factors in the developments here over the last 25, 30 years and ignore others. So they would see the things that you've listed, collusion, betrayal of justice and truth, and wouldn't see the considerable strides that have been made in dismantling the state.
That's the important thing you've got to put on the record there. Like, this is not helping. Never mind the sort of brutality of the act itself. To shoot a man in front of his 12-year-old son. Good God Almighty! What sort of mentality?
It was particularly savage. Okay, let's go on to something that I think makes a lot of people in Ireland uneasy, and I'm wondering if you're one of them, but I doubt it. And that is, of all people, once again, Stephen Collins in the Irish Times wrote this article about travellers and racism. Yeah. And he says that there's been findings of a report which was called Suicide Among the Traveller Community in South County Dublin and Ballyfermot. And it found that travellers have a suicide rate 6 times that of the normal or the general population.
Yeah.
Riddle me that. Explain that.
Someone that no, I'm not saying that's I can stand over that, but I read an article from a traveller last year sometime, and he told, I think, as far as I remember, he said that there had been 3 suicides as immediate family in something like 3-5 years. Can't remember, don't remember. But I was thinking to myself, good God, this is a massive rate of suicide within one family. And the other thing about it, a lot of people see a lot of travellers as arrogant as all the rest of it. What they don't see is that a lot of them suffer very badly from racism, that they feel alienated from society, that their prospects are not good, that when they go into a pub, people say, oh, and they use a derogatory term, and so on. that while they might put up a big face, I know, letting on they don't care, that underneath they feel terrible and all the rest. And Jude, let's be honest, we have not treated our travelling community well. Now, by the way, let's get this clear. The other side of the story, there are some travellers who don't need much help and giving travellers a bad name either. Let's put that on the record as well. But no, there are many decent travellers, people who have done nobody any harm, and they're just stigmatised by the word traveller.
Might it be that, you're right, of course, there are travellers who have done bad things, terrible things even. But might part of the reason for that be because of the way that they're treated, where, as we say, 6 times the number of traveller people kill themselves? I'll tell you what the general public attitude towards travellers reminds me of. It reminds me of when I asked kids in Canada about blacks in the States and the kind of racism and so on that was displayed. We were teaching To Kill a Mockingbird at the time, or studying it. And they said, oh, it's disgusting, it's horrible. And then I said, well, what about the native people here, what we knew as Indians at one time, who were on Skid Row and, getting pregnant and drugs and alcohol? And he said, those people, and nothing you can do with those people. They're just, all they want to do is drink all day and shoot heroin and so on. So you have that same kind of incorrigible dismissal. That's in their nature, these native people. They're just like that, and there's nothing we can do about it. Of course, they fail educationally, they fail in terms of health, they have earlier deaths, probably suicide rates are the same. And you could apply all of those to the traveller community. What the hell are we doing? When has there last been a serious initiative to try to change that? Travellers have been around, well, certainly since I was a kid. And I wasn't a day or yesterday.
Yeah. But, by the way, I was in Australia, and I remember exact same with the Aboriginal people. I'm not raising even little. And that suddenly, when they start with the Aboriginals, they're too much, and they're on the streets and all the rest of it. And there's nothing you can really do. And that was the attitude. Good, merciful, whatever. But I always said the story, Jude. I think there has to be a sort of realistic thing. People have to set out there. There's what is it, Pave Point in Dublin. Anytime a traveller gets involved in something, they use the argument, you're after come out, it's circumstances and all the rest of it. I don't think that's helpful, because see if somebody steals something and it's open and shut case, saying, well, poor Johnny, he had no choice. I don't buy that argument. But I also buy the argument, your point is well made the other way. Like, if you don't provide facilities, if you don't provide education, if you don't provide health, and give opportunities, what do you expect?
I couldn't agree more. There is a point where they make a decision that they're going to do this, they're going to wreck a pub, or they're going to steal something, and they're going to attack somebody or rob them or whatever. But also you have to take into account, how did they arrive at this point? What sort of background did they have? As you say, did their family member, maybe a family member, committed suicide? They lived in poverty. If they got any money, it was money they'd stolen. The cards are stacked against them.
The argument surely has to be that they address the fundamentals from early on. Get proper education. Get children into schools. Get proper accommodation. Get possibly, where possible, jobs, prospects, opportunities, and and then maybe if you attack the problem at source, that the outcomes will be very different.
Yes, I mean, for example, Pat, there are loads of people who are working hard to do things for the health of people in the south. Let's take the south, I suppose the north as well. And there are lots of people who are working very hard to help youngsters in school, especially youngsters who are falling behind. And one of the famous cases is, young Protestant boys, where that section of the population is not doing as well as it can. And you do hear of these initiatives and efforts to change that. When have you heard of a similar initiative addressed towards travellers? I haven't heard about it at all. Now, what is it? What's the blind spot that politicians and people, public figures, have with regard to them?
Because you know what you were saying about your discussions in Canada, it's pretty much the same here. It's almost an innate thing here, or an ingrained thing. And you talk to most Irish people, particularly, well, I'll refer to the south, and you get them about travellers. they just sort of go shake their shoulders and act their lost cause. They don't make any effort to sort of change anything, and so it's a never-ending cycle of repeat, repeat, repeat.
Yeah, he talks. Collins talks very well. I think it came into the report. Actually, he was reporting on where when a traveller will enter a pub, that the people there they might serve him, but you'll see glances exchanged between the bartender and some of the customers, between the customers and each other, and those glances are racist. Those glances are racist. They're saying, "Here comes trouble. This guy is likely to do things that civilized society wouldn't put up with." And in some cases, they're right. But I mean, they're not exactly pushing the thing forward by sitting back and saying, "Oh, these guys are trouble. These guys are, they don't observe the usual norms of society."
I agree with every word you're saying. The only problem is I would love to know how you change it. Like, because I knew a barman in Derry, and he was a very decent fella. And me and him got into a discussion one day, and he just basically said, he said, "No, Pat." I said, "I'll not name his name." He said, I said to him, "You not serve?" He says, "No." He says, "I'll tell you why." He says, "When you go out for a drink," he says, "say you and Jude Collins go down for a pint." He says, "the two of you land in together and you sit down, you have a chat and all the rest." He says, "What will happen with travellers?" He says, 10 or 15 of them will arrive in together after a funeral or a wedding or something. He says, "They take over the place and they sort of switch." And he says, "So on." And he says, he says, "They intimidate you with that sort of attitude." He says, "They get drunk, such and such." And I thought, wait a minute, is that a culture thing? Is there, is his criticism legitimate, or is it over the top? And you sort of say then, is there a way that sort of that the traveller community brings this on themselves? And if so, how do you address that?
Well, as we were talking about saying that there should be peace negotiations with regard to the attack on Ukraine, the same thing applies in terms of this. Of course, it's a rotten situation. Of course, it's exactly what you've described. But I mean, who's beginning to do something about it? Nobody. I don't know. Well, I mean, this report's, that's why that report's very good that it has done that. I didn't know until I read it.
Yeah.
That suicide was 6 times. 6 times. Can you imagine, Pat?
Yeah.
If that was black people or Indians or whatever.
There was a traveller community living in Letterkenny, and I remember the suicide rate there, the alcoholism rate and the suicide rate were off the scale. And it's a sort of a terrible condemnation of us as a human, as a people, that's happening.
And it's not as if this was a new problem. This problem has been here forever. And, generation after generation, we've shaken our heads and said, "Oh, God, lock the place up. These guys are coming."
Exactly.
Terrible. Listen, Pat, we have a couple of minutes. Is there anything bright, cheerful, good you can talk about? Is there nothing sunny, sweet happening in Donegal or Derry or the northwest of our province?
No, the only thing, Judy, I know what I started doing, and it's not cheerful, but it's different. I started reading. Remember John Bolton? He was the the absolute talk of I started reading his. I think it's called In the Situation Room. He was Trump. He became Trump's sort of defense secretary.
Yeah.
And you when you start reading it, you go, no wonder the Americans are detested. The arrogance of that man is off the scale. America was right to do whatever it wanted. See the Israelis, they're our allies, so they can kill as many Palestinians as they want. We should have invaded Iraq. There's no problem about it all. You sit and going back, wait a minute. And I don't want to go back to the sort of the Russian thing, but how does a nation with 400 million or whatever it is, and some of them great people, and how do they elect such assholes? And I mean, we've had Trump, we've had Bush, we've had. God, you tell me your theory.
Yeah, well, I don't know either. It's easy to play to the lowest common denominator, and in fact, you're right. The US is forever finding itself thousands of miles from home, killing people. That's the long and short of it. Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq. Now, well, they're not in the Ukraine, but I'll bet there's a few undercover operators from the US forces in there.
Yeah.
This is supposed to be the cheerful part, Pat. Come on, give us a joke. Sing us a song.
No, the only thing I can think of is not even cheerful. No, the love of my life when I was growing up was Raquel Welch. She died.
Oh
That's like,
yes, oh poor Raquel, and that bikini she had. Do you remember the
oh,
bikini made
uh,
of rabbit skins or something?
you know,
Oh, and there's a
some,
cheerful thought.
I,